All right, well, good morning, everybody. We're about at the number of participants I anticipated, so we'll go ahead and get started with today's workshop. Appreciate everybody joining on a Friday, and apologize that we had to skip our last one when folks were tied up in other meetings that went a little bit longer. So we're going to cover the material that we would have covered last week. And then we'll decide if we need another workshop here in the near future since we skipped one. Just for a logistics perspective, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our task force YouTube channel, world famous. So if you have to drop off early, or if you have colleagues that couldn't join or others interested, you can always point them there for the recording of the meeting. Please mute yourself if you're not talking. Please raise your hand if you want to talk. That'll help us maintain some order during the meeting. Let me cover, before we get started with the substance of the agenda, our typical antitrust admonition. It is up on the screen. I won't read it word for word, but it's just a reminder that as we do with all of our meetings, in this meeting, we will be committed to full compliance with federal and state antitrust laws and to maintaining the highest ethical standards in the way we conduct our activity. Here on the screen, I've got a proposed agenda. This is really a continuation from our meeting at the end of October. We covered 3 of the 5 things up there, but we didn't quite get to caps. We didn't quite get to changes to the governing document that we may want to see that are unrelated to anything else that we've talked about. So I thought we could start by picking up where we left off. And then we committed to revisiting and making some decisions on the topics that we talked about last time. So I thought once we cover the things we haven't talked about yet, we'd go back to the October discussion and see if we can have some general consensus on a path forward on those topics. And then just a reminder that in just over a month, we've got our quarterly task force meeting, December 15th. Task force members should have that on your calendar. We'll get a public notice posted quickly. And then we do have a quarterly report that we'll need to prepare. Obviously, part of it will focus on the discussions that we've been having and a report out on consensus around those issues or lack of consensus. I have not yet started putting that draft together. Really wanted to see where this discussion went, but I'll try to give you all plenty of time before the December 15th meeting to look at a draft so that we can talk about any changes we may want to make at that December 15th meeting. That seemed like a perfectly good way to start our day with these topics. Well then, like we did last time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and Tiffany will share hers, and I appreciate all the good work she did last time to capture our discussion. And why don't we pick up on the CAP discussion? And I know that a lot of these are interrelated topics, and I'm not trying to separate them out as not related by separating them out into these categories of discussions. But on the CAPS topic, one is the 20% limit per ADER provider. Right? One is the 80 megawatt and 40 megawatt caps that are divided on a load ratio share per load zone. And then one other topic could be, are those caps the right caps? As we sit here right now, the intent being to cover concerns about the current pilot project structure, if any, so that we can ensure a successful pilot program. So let me stop talking and see if anybody has something they want to say around the caps, those 3 categories of caps. Right. You're first up. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. I wanted to start talking perhaps about the caps per load zone. I think the intent was to make certain that there's an opportunity system-wide, though the aggregations seem to be concentrated in a couple load zones, in and around Houston and Dallas. So I'm not certain that there's a system need or an ERCOT concern about keeping that diversity, but I'd be curious to hear if the panel, or rather the task force, had any opinions on making that a little bit more fluid.
So let me start while people give a thought to that. It was a starting point to make sure that there wasn't only one area of the state that had ADERs registered, right? We want a diverse pilot in lots of different ways, including geographic diversity, in addition to diversity of the providers themselves and diversity of the equipment that's part of the aggregated DER. And ERCOT does have some discretion on moving those caps around as phase one goes forward. So with that, I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on go forward. Dave?
Hey,
Welcome.
Jason. Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much. I guess I just wanted to note that, I mean, I think Greg is right. Certainly, I know we were part of sort of the discussion on the load zone limitations. I think this would apply to some degree to the 20% by QSC value. I would say those are not really ERCOT desired values. Obviously, we still, we had a lot of thoughts and feelings about the overall values across it. I mean, those were really intended to be, I would say, equity and fairness type limitations. And so I think they're valuable to think about from some of our specific concerns. I don't think we have like reliability concerns, for example, of or even administration concerns about trying to change those. I think those are, again, more for the group here to think about equity and fairness. And now that we've had some time, do we want to open it up a little bit more and maybe think about that differently? I think we're very open to that.
Yeah, if I remember the current stats, Dave, I think Houston might be the closest to hitting its load zone cap at maybe 26% subscribed for energy, less of that for non-spend. So we don't have anybody coming close to busting that cap for load zone. So I don't know how important this one is to tackle right now. But that's why I did want to open it up just to see if that was different, would we see more participation?
Greg, could you kind of state the problem you're trying to solve with this? Is it to allow an individual aggregation to reach a certain size for a certain reason? I think you've discussed that in the past, but it might be good to remind people.
Thanks, Eric, for that reminder and teaser there. To Jason's point, we're not at the limit, so there's not a problem to fix just yet. It would be nice to capture an action item or a marker to revisit this as we get closer to the cap. And as Jason had mentioned, I think Houston is the closest. The big challenge with managing an ADER from our perspective is reaching economies of scale. These assets telemeter data and are managed in a very similar fashion to that of a traditional resource. Comparatively, the ERS and other demand response programs that ERCOT administers have a real light touch and light telemetry requirements. So the costs associated with managing those programs are much lower than that of an ADER. And we had seen, the break-even point to be around 15 megawatts, which, would not only bust the cap on certain load zones, but certainly approach the cap for certain QSEs. And I appreciate Dave's feedback. I'm thinking out loud now. The way to keep diversity and the 20% rule in place might be to start thinking about lifting the overall cap, though that's not necessarily impeding anyone that I'm aware of right now. It was a long-winded way of saying perhaps we could increase the 80 megawatt limit and preserve the diversity tools that we have to keep it dispersed through load zones and queasies.
Got it. And then, and I see, Raji, you have your hand up. We should also be thinking in this conversation, what might we want to do differently for the success of phase one? And then separately, as we think about phase two or phase 1B, whatever the next iteration is of this pilot, what do we think about those caps, right? So I wanted to make sure we talk about both of those things. I think right now we're focusing on phase one, how to make it most successful, which is incredibly important. I want to make sure that before we leave this topic, we cover the second piece of it, which is where do we see these caps evolving as we move forward? Raji?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just sort of hearing where we're at, even in Houston, which has the highest enrollment, but isn't really anywhere near sort of fully subscribed. I think it's worthwhile to flag this or put a pin in this and sort of it is something probably worth revisiting in the future, but I'm not seeing how any of these caps are necessarily a barrier to phase one sort of maximizing participation and enrollment. But I mean, if there are differing opinions about that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel, and then Amy.
Yeah, just I wanted to, I guess, support Raji's point. We had brought up as Enchanted Rock the caps early on in the phase one process with the expectation that if we were participating, we would need to go above an individual zone cap. Our sub 1 megawatt sites are mostly concentrated out in the AEP territory, and if we try to get a decent aggregation together, yeah, even with just a handful of like 800 kW sites, we'd exceed the load zone cap. So I mean, we do support some further discussion, but to Rajiv's point, don't know if it's that urgent in phase one. There are a couple of hurdles that we need to get over in terms of the revenue model for the ADER before we can bring those assets in.
Got it. That's fair. So what I'm hearing is that it's an important consideration post making some of the other decisions that we've made. And in fact, we may need to revisit this if the economics justify some of the larger commercial systems being able to participate because of, okay. So I'll make sure I heard that correctly. We've got a lot of hands up. So Amy and then Alex.
Yeah, I would, just thinking about process, Jason, maybe this is an appropriate, if we're all coming to consensus, we should revisit this or keep having that conversation. This could be something that we always just get the report on the current capacity in the different load zones, especially at our quarterly meetings, right? So December 15th, and then we can put that in the in whatever our report would be to the commission of, we're not near it. We haven't heard that it's a barrier right now. However, we're going to keep an eye on it and have that sort of continual report of how close we're getting, or if anyone, to Joel, to your point, if anyone has raised this as a particular issue. I just think just so we can have a spot where we've noted it for the commission and staff appropriately. So just a thought about our process.
Yeah, that's
on-
fair.
On monitoring this.
Yeah, that's fair. And I always like to call my friends at PUC and ERCOT out of order. So I see Dave's hands up. I'll call on you now.
Oh, no, please. I just wanted to get in the queue. Please keep going on
Okay,
okay. With Alex.
Okay, I just want to make sure that if you had something that was timely, topical, that we get to you first.
If I asked for something that's too much, sorry.
No, no worries. Alex, you're up.
Jason, thank you. Alex with AEP. I agree with the comments to revisit this item at a later date when we start approaching load zone limits. I do want to just comment on Joel's conversation, and we currently don't have any active aggregations in our footprint. And so if you have a list of items that qualify under a megawatt, let's get those in. Let's start kind of looking at what you're proposing, and that may serve as a substance for additional conversations at a later date. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. John, good morning. Good to see you again.
Hey, good morning. I think I have a couple thoughts. One, I'd like to hear from ERCOT if they think there's flexibility with any of those three items, the 20% QSE, the overall caps, and the caps by load zone. Because I agree with the comments that we should just continue to look at this in future meetings. But if we're thinking through and the Houston load zone is starting to reach the limits, and if either a DOTA is amended, additional registrations are put in an existing DOTA, or if a new one comes in that then starts pushing up against the Houston cap, if ERCOT thinks or if they need flexibility within the governing document to just amend to kind of, maybe we could just take a stair-step approach. And the reason I'm thinking about that is, at Bandera Electric, we've kind of circled back on our model, and we're looking at a subscription model, kind of an energy as a service model. Our board just approved a budget so that maybe between now and this time next year, we'll be able to provide our members with behind the meter storage of over a megawatt, which within the LCRA load zone would mean we're at about 30+%. And if we're working with LCRA as our QSC, there's a couple problems, that we'll encounter, not tomorrow, but in 12 months from now, with all the different caps. So it just seems if there's some flexibility built in there and some discretion for ERCOT, that might be one way to solve the problem as we go along.
That's fair. And in my recollection of the governing document, and others can correct me if I get this wrong, is that ERCOT has the flexibility without any changes to the governing document. They have flexibility to address the load zone cap, move them around to accommodate a successful pilot. I don't know what the process is for them doing that. So maybe we can get some clarity on that piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and I don't know that Catherine's on here as well, but yeah, that's correct. I think the way it was written was intentional, such that the 80 and 40, the system-wide limits, are sort of hard-coded, if you want to put it that way, within the governing document. Saying it another way, we would have to update the governing document to change those. But I think by memory as well, Jason, is that actually as it applies to both this 20% limit at the QSE and at the load zone level, that there was discretion written in to change it. I think that it would be as simple as, if there were consensus within this group, we would simply, update the files that we have on our website and maybe just do like a market notice or something like that. I don't know how I'm not sure the best way to exactly communicate it, and maybe feedback would be helpful there, but I think it is as simple as something like that, where we simply state and make clear and transparent publicly that those are now different than what we originally had. I guess one thing I wanted to note, I guess as long as I'm talking, I will go out of queue with my other little comment. The one thing I just wanted to note as well is when we talk about, and you mentioned Houston specifically, I want to make sure it's clear to the group that is linked directly to JOTAs we've received, and I think this is relevant to something maybe Amy mentioned, and that is just simply to note, even though we're at that higher percentage for Houston, that still doesn't reflect people who are actively participating in the wholesale market. So I think a number of those folks are actually still in the process of getting in. So I think it's at some level we're even further away from hitting some of these limits, just for what it's worth.
No, I think that's fair. Eric.
At the risk of complicating the conversation, Joel, I wonder if we could have a quick conversation about what your comments were when you said revenue model. Were you talking about ancillary service availabilities?
Yeah, that and the NPRR 1131 is the bid floor access for load resources. Those two items were on my mind when I made that comment.
Okay. I think it would be worthwhile for us to talk about additional ancillary services as part of this conversation, because I think the feedback that we've gotten from a number of people is that one of the reasons I haven't participated yet is because we picked the hardest ancillary service to provide for an aggregation first, due to an artifact of history or whatever other reasons that we might be able to talk about. And ECRS is the one that is most similar to non-spin. And while I think it's easy to justify, in my mind, all of the ancillary services, I understand ERCOT wants to think about that some more. But at some point, it might make sense to talk about Joel's issue, because I think it's shared by a wide variety of people on the task force as a way to get to these caps sooner and then be able to raise them because we were so successful.
Yep, fair point. And I think we'll come back to that as part of our follow-up from our October workshop, and maybe get some additional thoughts on the table and feedback from folks. Jake, good morning.
Good morning. I want to come to the caps kind of from a little bit of a different angle, in that I'm not hearing from anybody any particular problem associated with increasing the megawatt caps. But I do think it is part and parcel to potentially being able to do other ancillary services as well. And so from the way that I'm looking at this from a commercial perspective is that for me to build these portfolios, obviously we have to, invest in the telemetry solutions and everything that goes along with that. So we would need to know with relative certainty, if we were able to provide ECRS as an example, that there will be room for us where we have customers. For us, that tends to be largely in Houston and then also in the Dallas metro area. And so if there isn't any particular risk we're trying to avoid in increasing the megawatt caps, I would encourage us to think about doing that, not necessarily once we hit them, but just simply because there isn't necessarily a problem in doing so, and it opens it up for us to be able to to have a little bit more certainty if we do allow other ancillary services to be able to provide those. That also helps us for recruiting customers to participate. They're looking for some kind of certainty as well. So even though we're not necessarily at the caps anywhere, not even in Houston, I do think if we were able to provide ECRS, we would see a lot more in terms of registration. We see a lot more people trying to register. And I do think that's likely to happen where we do see the most concentration already. So from our standpoint, we would certainly support increasing the megawatt cap, but keeping the specific provider limit so that we can ensure there's diversity of providers.
Got it. Dave, you're back in.
Sorry, too many, but I was trying to lower my hand, turn on my camera and my mic all simultaneously and failed miserably. I guess just one of the things just to note is, again, I think where we would like to focus, if there's a concern of the limits are limiting participation, to focus on the load zone and 20% limit until, and not as much on the system wide. I think that's for no other reason. That's just where we had the most flexibility to change in the short term here. What I did want to just kind of note for the group too, that those aren't all or nothing. So for example, if, we maybe for the load zones, we could do some multiplier of them, like 1.5 times or something like that. So we still sort of generally try and leave some space in for load zone diversity without necessarily limiting it at an exact pro rata share. Just an idea as folks think about it is, I don't think it's we have load zone limits or we don't. Maybe there's something in between. For the 20% of QC, per QC, again, that's not at all or nothing. If we did 25%. I don't know. We're focusing on much of that one. Maybe it's the load zone limit. That's the bigger concern here. But anyways, it does feel like there's some sort of mathematical in between sort of there's a load zone limit as defined today, or there's not. So just hopefully that's adds a little bit as optionality for the group to think about, because I think there is this tension here of we want to get more participation, but we also want to leave the door open for people to participate in the future as they're, working on the board with their boards, or, working through the business models, or whatever the case may be. Or, Joel mentioned 1131, and we're still working to implement that MPRR, which sounds like it has some impact in terms of how people are thinking about the business case.
Yeah, and then I see, Greg, you have your hand up, and then maybe we can wrap up our discussion on this topic. What I'm hearing is a fairly consistent view that these are important items, not yet problematic, not the critical path item, although it could be at some point. And my recollection when we came up with these caps is consistent with what Dave just kind of went through as a potential next step. The 20% cap could have easily have been 10% or 15% or 22.5%, right? We wanted diversity of participation. So I think incremental movement, if we think in the future it's necessary, is the right way to go versus there are no caps. All this stuff could be in Houston, right? We still want the diversity of geography, the diversity of providers. So my proposal would be, whenever we revisit this again, that we approach it in that way. What incremental steps do we need to make, if any, versus do away with the caps altogether, that ERCOT has the discretion to move around. So that's kind of where I think I'm hearing this conversation land. But Greg, let me call on you to see if you have something more to add.
No, I think that was a great summary. The only thing I'll add is that what Jaden mentioned was really helpful for me to think through this, because we mentioned economies of scale as a reason to move caps, and I do think that when ECRS is introduced, that'll improve the business case and the interest and the participation. So, before Dave spoke, I thought I might be able to get consensus around kicking the can down the road and lifting the overall cap to 100 megawatts. Arbitrary increase, but in the spirit of not having this conversation again sooner, it seemed like a no regrets solution. So I guess, Dave, not to put you on the spot, I'd like to challenge if the 20 megawatts would make a meaningful reliability difference to ERCOT. And if not, is there a consensus to maybe delay having this conversation a quarter so we can focus on introduction of ECRS?
I guess the changing the system-wide limit arbitrarily to try to get more in individual load zones seems a little nonsensical to me. I think if the concern is that I don't see the system-wide limit creating any impact to people's ability to participate at this point. It sounds like it's the other limits that are potentially doing that. So why we wouldn't address those, it's unclear to me.
Okay, I think good conversation on this topic. Absent any objection, we can move to our next one, which is changes to the governing document, other than stuff we've talked about, both today and our last meeting. So I know that there have been some discussions around the telemetry and other requirements. So this is really an open-ended question. With the folks that have gone through the process, are there things you wish would be differently worded in the governing document? As we look forward to one of these days, there will be changes to the governing document. We should start a list of things we would like to see so that it can be folded in when that day comes. Dave.
Yeah, I guess I'll just quickly mention, I think there was something that we found does not work. And I think we've talked about with this group already, and Kanan has shared some with the board, and that's related to some of the validation we do on telemetry. I think we found some flaws in the approach, and that's really probably a low-hanging fruit thing, but and Tesla folks were able to work with us on trying to use some discretion that we had around that, but I think we can do that a lot better. So that's a minor item, but we are going to want to improve on the validation to make it the way it was written. You could viewed in one way, it effectively made it almost impossible to comply and meet the validation requirements, and that's obviously not the intent. So that is one we plan to change for sure. And I know I'm sure there's other ideas folks have beyond that.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of that had come up previously. Greg?
I'd like to visit storage state of charge metrics for distributed aggregations of storage.
And then Greg, is that something that would be language changes to the governing document or something added that's not in there today?
I believe it's something added. There's really no stipulation on if the ADER is comprised uniformly of storage, like how they have to comply, if it's like an ESR wholesale asset, or if it's something else.
Yep, Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that Greg makes a good point. I will say one of the things that we also didn't think about when we wrote the governing document is, broadly, these are treated as CLRs from rules unless those exemptions are captured within the governing document. The fact that these, aren't necessarily controllable load resources by their nature, or at least the traditional controllable load resources, the fact that they are storage, there was some expectation written to the governing document that we would get information around the storage components, like the max state of charge and things like that, that's captured, I think, in the DOTA form. But how we would potentially have that information come in for the totality of the aggregation and how that might be used and thought about as it relates to other protocols, I think was a mess. So at least some clarity about how we want to do that would be helpful information to add to the governing document. So that would be added language for sure.
Got it. And maybe what we can do is we identify these things, and we want to identify them all today, right? And I welcome thoughts from ERCOT on this approach, but actually put language on paper so that we not only have a list, but we actually have the words that redlined in the governing document that we'd like to see. That way it's we can mark that work done. And so maybe a smaller working group can work on language if that works for ERCOT. I know it's y'all's the governing document, so I'm not trying to step on y'all's toes.
No, I mean, I think the intent is, and I think even the way the governing document is that, we take an initial stab at drafting, but there has always been the expectation that we would work with you all on what those red lines would look like. And so just like we did with the original governing document, we would intend to work with you on the phase 2 version.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Rajiv?
Yeah, this is just sort of a process comment. I think it would be amending the governing document or maybe just sort of the registration process. But when we were registering our DOTA with ERCOT, in the first instance, we gave them our DOTA with all the resources listed. They came back to us, flagged the ones that are in ERS. And so we removed those, resubmitted, and in that sort of intervening week or whatever it was, some additional resources that were listed on our DOTA that weren't in the first instance in ERS had enrolled in ERS. And so is there a way we can sort of streamline that to avoid that sort of situation where if we submit a DOTA, ERCOT is simply scrubbing out the resources that are in ERS and sort of putting the ones that we have listed, like preventing them from signing up for ERS? I'm not sure how that would work, whether that needs to happen in the governing document or it's just a process improvement in terms of the registration process and getting a DOTA approved by ERCOT.
Yeah, I guess I can just, if Jason's helping me to respond to that, I think something in the governing document would be useful. I mean, I think then it sounds like, what that sounds like it would be a better defining sort of who gets first call or who gets dibs on the customer. And so, specifying that I think would be useful, because otherwise I don't know that maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know that we necessarily have the right to not allow them to participate in ERS if they are in a DOTA or anyways, just some language that I think describes that better would be helpful in the governing document, even if there is something procedural we can do a little bit different with our existing flexibility.
What else comes to mind? And maybe we can think about that for those of you that have gone through the process. These are some good changes that I don't sound like they'll be controversial. So if anybody else has anything else, feel free to bring that up, either email or at a next meeting. We can continue this running list of things as we learn. We want to make sure we capture it all. So what I may do is drop this document in our team site, which we haven't used very heavily since we moved on from drafting the governing document, but we can drop this in there, and so it can be a living, breathing thing. You can feel free to just hop in there, the task force members and using ERCOT to add to it as things come up. Are we ready to move on from this part of the discussion? So what I had anticipated doing was doubling back to the topics we covered last time. Last time we covered 3 items. We talked about density on the TDU distribution system and some ideas on how we might achieve that density. We talked about interoperability, and we talked about other ancillary services. I was planning to revisit them in that same order. So on density on the distribution system, we had a a couple of ideas. Some of which would be, TDUs potentially through energy efficiency programs, helping to get equipment installed in customer premise on the same circuit. And then obviously the market would have to take over from there to get those premises signed up for an ADER. But that was one way to affect the density goal that the TDUs have mentioned from the get-go. And there are some other suggestions, but having had a couple weeks to think about it, knowing that you're working on lots of other things too, anybody have reactions to that so we can start to make some decisions? Martha?
Can you hear me, Jason?
Yes, perfect. Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thanks. Martha Henson from Encore. So I think we're needing some more breadcrumbs on this, Jason. So I was wondering if CenterPoint might be able to flesh this out in more detail and send it to some of the, investor-owned TDU members to circulate internally.
100%. And I will admit, as I think I mentioned last time, it wasn't a fully baked idea, and it may very well be a bad one. But happy to do some additional thought around it. I can preview maybe a little bit more of what I was thinking. And I believe some TDUs currently have a solar program as part of their energy efficiency suite of programs. I don't know that any of those provide rebates for a storage device along with that solar incentive, but theoretically you could. And if typically TDUs don't target particular areas and particular circuits for the program, so this is not typical, but presumably you could, with some PUC oversight authority, green light, whatever that looks like, target particular circuits to approach those customers through presumably a third party to see who would be interested in getting this equipment at a reduced cost, no cost, right? It could be whatever we think the right answer is, with the requirement that you participate in an ADER with someone, of your choosing. So that's at a high level. That's the best bad idea I've come up with for how to achieve density without just waiting for it to happen. Amy.
And so just,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Amy. I was just a quick follow-up. I guess I'm just not sure whether these concepts are going to be implementable or not for Encore. And so we really appreciate, you getting some additional details from you on these, Jason. But, I guess the thing that comes to mind is how could these sound like options, not things that would be able to be mandated to increase participation. So I just want to make sure I'm thinking about that the right way.
Yeah, and I can maybe work on a framework for it. But so, Carmen, you look like you're first, and then Amy.
Sure. First, I was going to say, Jason, I don't think it's a bad idea. Might need some more legs, but I would support you on it not being a bad idea. I think the other element of it, though, is not just getting the devices installed, but you could still be aligning the value with load reductions in those areas too, which would be in alignment with the energy efficiency program objectives as well. So imagining doing envelope interventions in addition to getting a battery installed or solar installed, et cetera. So it'd be kind of ADR readiness, as it were, and then have them enrolled in in an ADR pilot with a participating vendor or provider. But I would agree with Martha that it maybe would be best suited as an opt-in with permissions from the PUCT as opposed to a obligation.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks, Carmen. Amy?
Carmen, that's sort of where my brain is going, and Jason, you know, both from Centerpoint and Encore, I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking or where the potential areas to focus on could be. This could be one of like a future workshop, just to, that's sort of where my head is at, of like learning what other TDUs have done in other states for different programs and what those learnings are. I'm thinking specifically that this could be a very similar approach to like a connected solutions type program, where connected solutions, which uses, you enroll, you know, a solar plus battery system, or it's a bring your own device program, but it did come out of and evolve out of their EE programs. So they related it to the goals of their EE programs, but it's actually more directed, right? Because you're applying to a set schedule, almost like you use the EE programs, but it's more of like a demand response plus result. And so just learning what other utilities have done. I also know there's a utility out in New York who did try a specific program that was only targeted at constrained feeders and giving away a substantial, almost a free battery, and it didn't work well. Like, it's really hard to do a very specific program only, as opposed to thinking about something that is a zone wide or utility wide, but then maybe having adders, right? Like it's very hard to ramp something up in a specific feeder and that's it. So, but that was our initial take, but I think it would be worth having the conversations about what's worked and maybe how it could fit into the regime that we have here in Texas, as far as your abilities as TDUs and what the current programs are. But I think that there's some really untapped potential in this area, but probably a specific breakout workshop on this or a future meeting on this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach, so that we don't bog down this discussion with it much more. You know, I had originally thought and hoped that perhaps you could address our LMI goals also via this approach. I still think that's important, and we should try to see if that we can align that those two goals. However, another option that just comes to mind as you talk about the challenges of doing this is you could theoretically work with a developer in new construction and provide rebates to have this stuff put in, you know, to Energy Star qualifying homes already that would have some of the envelope requirements that you'd want to see. And then you get the density in that way, right? Maybe you have an entire new subdivision that has this stuff installed. Yeah, so that's just another option to think about to address some of the difficulties of retrofitting existing structures. You know, so but why don't I call on Eric? And it sounds like we want to have more discussion, more fleshed out proposal, and we can move on after Eric.
I just wanted to thank you and Amy for that back and forth conversation. I think that was very helpful. I would also just briefly state it would be nice to get an understanding of the goal here. I think I understand it, but I'm not sure I do, which means I'm sure other people don't totally understand it. The goal is not to create density across your whole system, but on a few feeders, right? Is that correct? Just to see what happens on a few feeders. At some point, maybe it'll be across the whole system when we're, you know, super successful. But
yeah, and I welcome others to articulate better than I can. But yes, to have some density in a particular place to learn what stresses may be on the system when you get to some density before we just integrate this and find out the hard way. But a key learning from this pilot from a TDU perspective was to understand what it does to our system at some scale before it gets to scale, right? So scale it up in a particular area and understand what that might do before you just learn in the wild when it happens.
That's great. And Greg has a comment here that I was about to say something similar. So it's a good thing that we're on the same page. But it'd be good to talk about like how those lessons learned will be shared and studied, and make sure that we're on the same page there. So if you get to density before somebody else gets to density, how do we share those lessons learned?
Got it. Chris.
Just one comment. There have been some very successful new home builder programs implemented. And in addition to that, we can also provide some examples of direct feeder load management. Actually, when I do the little overview on interoperability, I'm actually going to show a picture of a dedicated feeder project with a utility that was coordinated specifically with criteria for peak load management and provisioning of additional headroom capability for EV penetration. So these things are possible. They are being created, and we have some of those designs that we can share if anyone's interested.
Thanks for the good discussion on that topic. I think we have advanced the ball on it, and so I'll take the task of setting up some continued discussion. Let me ask this: it may be that a smaller group of folks getting together versus having 52 of us again on this discussion is the right approach, but I don't want to leave people out if we think that having a broader group workshop, just like we're having right now on this topic, is the right approach, or should a smaller group develop, flesh it out, and then come and present it to the larger group? Neither of those approaches is wrong, but what's the will of the group, Martha?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just suggest maybe the latter of those. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is this is something that really only applies to Encore, AEP, and Centerpoint, and TNMP, although they're not a task force member. And so my suggestion would be to have those companies have a call and think about this some more, and then use that to inform a larger discussion at a future task force meeting.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Wayne, calendar real quick. I don't know if you're talking about circuit density, apologize for jumping out of line. But talking about circuit density, we might want to be included in that as well from a distribution system. If you're talking about distribution systems, anyway, there may be some nuances for a NOE that I'm not aware of, but we probably want to be included in that as well if it's related to system reliability.
Okay. Amy.
I'd also be curious. I feel like some of this conversation could be helpful to munis and co-ops. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I think thinking about how these types of programs or enrollment or solution could help address low income or constrained feeders, or helping, while helping them reduce 4CP or peak load, like trying to find a way to leverage their resources has been a kind of a continued obstacle that's been brought up. So I would say let's leave this open to them as well if they want to participate.
Yeah. So maybe what I'll do is schedule a series of discussions to advance this, because similar to what we've done in the past, where we had the different market sectors get together, frame something up, involve another market sector of the task force to continue it, and then we ultimately have that discussion, right? So we did that quite a bit with the governing document and some other things. So I'll set up a series of those discussions, and we can we can advance that. Without any objection, I'll go to interoperability. So just a time check, we're at about an hour mark. The two other items I wanted to revisit from last time and come up with some path forward, just like we did. Doesn't mean we have to have all the answers, but we got a path forward on the density issue. Let's see what we can do with interoperability and then other ancillary services in that order that works. So I know we had a couple of conversations that were committed to offline on interoperability to start understanding different perspectives on that. Where do we want to start on interoperability? I know a smaller group was going to get together. I don't know if there's a report out on that. And then I know Chris, you had requested to present some information on this topic. I will not claim to be the smartest person on IEEE requirements and things like that. So I welcome education. Chris, if you can educate the group on these topics. Greg, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I just did want to confirm, we hosted a smaller group meeting with a number of market participants, and I welcome them to keep me honest on the summary here. There was discussion about the IEEE standards, and I think you have that outlined adequately here. I also encourage the participants to explore all commercial solutions, because I appreciate that these systems are expensive to procure, and I can promise you they're expensive to design, particularly where there are different market participants seeking to solve different problems. So customization of that has often been done through channel partners and not necessarily by the OEM, though we're eager to have those conversations and make certain that those conversations play out in all avenues. Thanks.
Got it. So while others think if they want to say something, Chris Hickman, I know you had some material you wanted to walk through on this topic. If now's a good time, I can turn it over to you, and let me check with Rajiv before we do that.
Yeah, no, I'll note just on the interoperability issue. I mean, we're definitely open to exploring commercial avenues. We have been, but at the last meeting, there was a question posed to me of, who are the providers you're seeking to be from a battery perspective to have sort of interoperability or communications capabilities with. And I think the easiest way to answer that is actually like there's only one provider that we do have sort of communications capabilities with. So in our view, sort of open comm standards and interoperability are key, notwithstanding sort of the commercial pathways as sort of a broader consideration to maximize participation in this pilot.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Tiffany, is it okay if I steal your share? All right. So I was asked several questions about this. I'm participating with about a dozen states on 222 implementation, and also Spider Working Group with NERC, some relevant stuff around like FERC 901, that just the order that was just passed. And so I was asked several questions. And so I put together a little information. I thought I'd start with a picture of the art of the possible. This is a program that has been designed in cooperation between a utility and their customers on the very specific issue of feeder load management, as well as some additional ancillary services for ramping services, duct curve mitigation, power factor correction, and phase balancing. And, just the art of the possible a little bit. What you're looking at is the 0 to 24 is just a slice a day, day of the year, obviously 365 days a year with the KW on the Z-axis. And this is a facility profile in this 3D topography representation of what the facility's load shape was prior to the additional resources being added of solar battery and load management, and the subsequent load profile for that facility after these resources were added, and noting that it now is a permanently load shifted resource that used to consume 20,000 kilowatt hours on peak, is now producing 30,000-ish kilowatt hours on peak, and all that load has been shifted to off-peak periods to provide headroom capability on that feeder, all while also provisioning power factor and phase balancing services from the DERs to the utility. So just art of the possible to start the conversation. The stuff that I put together here is just a bit of a broad overview from participation across the U.S. So first of all, the most important thing to always remember in the conversation is defining what a DER is. We had a very difficult time at the NERC Spider Working Group meeting because everybody wanted to keep talking about transmission connected resources, and by definition, that's not a DER. And so it's really important that you make sure to contain the conversation within the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, ADER incorporated a lot of different resources. I just put that in there for reference. I clipped in the communication protocols and wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that there's been a significant uptick in different states adopting 1547 2018. There's another 7 that are in the process of working on it. This is obviously coming much, much more quickly. And the 3 specific protocols that are referenced in 1547 have now done all of their work, such that the 4 types of data specified in 2018 to be transferred are now fully capable of supporting this within the standard protocol structure and setup. So all of that work has been done by the standards committees already. Looking forward, if you're interested, Maryland has a very in-depth proceeding on smart inverter settings that has a big session on November 15th. They are already looking at the dynamic ability of utilities to not only specify the deadband requirements, the different settings that are possible in a smart inverter. They are also looking at being able to do that dynamically by feeder, because obviously different feeders, different regions, different opportunities exist, where perhaps one feeder has a huge arc welder on it and needs to have broader capabilities defined than what may be necessary for other feeders attached to that substation. So they are looking at very dynamic capabilities with the opportunity for the utility to require over-the-air updates based on their current studies. Sorry, was there a question? Okay, sorry. There's a lot of work ongoing with NERC, EPRI, NASB, and the 1547 working group to continue to develop these standards, including auto reporting. These, in general, around the world, Australia, Ireland, and Germany, DERs that you cannot communicate and control and are uncoordinated are a mammoth issue. When they have a grid disturbance in Australia and all of the DERs trip off simultaneously, and then they all simultaneously turn back on exactly 15 minutes later, is obviously a mammoth issue for them. But we've also proven that they're invaluable additions for all kinds of distribution and system issues if they are integrated to the grid effectively. I will make note of a recent Pecan Street project that a white paper will be written on here in late Q4, early Q1. The new smart inverters, 4-quadrant capability, can be dialed between 0.8 and 1.2 leading power factor during 8,760 hours a year to, at minimum, correct the power factor at the premise, or potentially with utility signaling, be able to correct power factor for an entire feeder with no penalty. No measurable loss difference, dialing that inverter in either the charge or discharge cycle from 0.8 to 1.2 to be able to provision this service. And the previous paper Pecan Street published on power factor issues, you're looking at somewhere between a 6 and 15% energy efficiency savings on the feeder if you could correct power factor on the feeder. This is a great finding. If there are any utilities that are interested in learning more, I encourage you to reach out to Scott Henson, as there could be an expansion project. There's an expansion project being considered for this to incorporate a larger set of inverters across the state, and working with the manufacturers to upgrade their software firmware to be able to receive a utility signal for power factor correction, and or getting power factor at their premise to, at a minimum, correct the premise power factor. The short story here is that it is going to be crucial for utilities and ISOs to be able to communicate to these resources going forward, because there are going to be mandates for the different types of settings that these smart inverters allow, and they will need to be upgraded going forward. There was a large industry meeting with a bunch of inverter manufacturers. One very inappropriately stated, well, we just got to keep track of all the states that haven't adopted 1547 so we can dump all of our old equipment on them. This is a very real thing. It's an obvious thing. And your decisions about your future DER programs are going to be important. And it will be important to understand that most hybrid inverters that have been manufactured in the last 5 or 10 years are 4-quadrant capable. They are capable of meeting the 1547-2018 standard with software and firmware upgrades. This will be something that the industry will need to continue to push on the manufacturers to allow existing equipment already installed to be upgraded. A few myth-busting things. I was asked several questions. I have not been part of a bunch of conversations in Texas, but I was asked some very specific questions. The first one is very common everywhere. I am in Indiana participating in their series of workshops for 222 implementation yesterday. This is almost stated in every meeting that I attend, that we don't need to worry about this now. We don't have high enough penetrations. And the reality is, do you really want to wait until you actually have an issue to fix it? You know, kind of like happened with IBRs in Texas, in West Texas. The time to get it, to do this is now and get in front of it. I don't understand, somebody was talking about API fees. I don't understand that discussion at all, because if you actually adopt a standard, all the manufacturers implement the standard and the entire conversation disappears. In fact, the proactive vendors in this space are moving towards SIM compliant interfaces, utilizing industry SIM, so that they can do direct interface to market EMS and market operational systems with the data layer translation in a SIM compliant fashion. Dual registration is critical. The DERs, with the first picture that I showed you, they've proven invaluable to distribution companies, and appropriate rules can be written to demonstrate this. The New York rules for dual participation, the California rules for dual participation for batteries, and the best example, and I've provided this UK flexibility market document to Jason. They have defined 4 dynamic products for distribution already, and they are already implementing this within their structure and have aggregated 4.7 gigawatts of demand side flexibility resources. I'm sorry, 3.7 gigawatts of demand side flexibility resources into this market space on a UK peak of 57 gigawatts. So they have defined not only the products, they have also defined which of those products can be dual participation, both with the distribution system and the existing wholesale market construct. So the framework is pretty straightforward to be able to do this, to allow dual participation. And my personal belief is that DER's highest and best use is in the distribution system, and that it is crucial for utilities to have the opportunity to engage with customers and be able to do this. There was a question about hotspot management and having the ability to either price or do different things. And I got the impression that this was kind of thought of as a bad thing. I don't understand the conversation specifically, but congestion pricing is good for transmission, but bad for distribution. I don't think that is the right approach for any of us that have worked in utilities and lived through a feeder reconductor project that just absolutely destroys a community for months at a time, screws up traffic. Every customer gets an outage, costs millions of dollars to get a couple megawatts of capacity for bigger wire. Being able to properly identify non-wires alternatives and be able to incent or price them appropriately. Again, I understand that this is an issue in Texas, but I firmly believe that utilities should be given the ability and the flexibility to identify non-wires alternatives and work with customers directly or through an aggregator partner, whatever the case may be, to implement these types of solutions as much more effective solutions in their toolbox. So ultimately, the software and firmware and the ability for utility and ISO signaling is going to constantly evolve over the next decade. We're seeing it in multiple state proceedings now. We're seeing it very actively utilized in the UK, Australia, Ireland, and Germany. And it is becoming a very effective thing for utilities and ISOs to be able to coordinate and signal to these devices, but only because they are interoperable. So in summary, DERs will become a crucial element in our overall supply mix going forward. Yes, it will take some time for them to get to certain penetration levels. But if you look at all the EIA data and EPRI data and every other study data about penetration of solar batteries and EVs, it is not that far in the horizon where these could be material for reliability considerations and load management across a whole different sector of our industry. Interoperability and standards are the foundation for this success, period, end of story. And DERs are generators. And I do like the fact that Texas has moved forward very effectively by considering these things as generators, not as a one-off resource, and lowering the technical requirements for adoption. I think we need to begin with the end in mind. These are very functional, very dynamic resources. And because they are those kinds of resources, not just load management, the ability to treat them like the resource that they are should be considered in the standards. And the last note that I would make that is made in basically every meeting that I've participated in across the US and the world is that these are customer-owned resources. They spent the money, it was their money, it was their time, it was their effort. And we need to be focused on ensuring that customers that have invested their own hard-earned money to develop these resources on their premise have the ability to execute them into utility and market programs through a open set of standards and interoperability, because there is no possible way that a consumer home isn't going to have 4 different manufacturers in their premise over time for their battery, their EV, their solar, their home energy management. And if we don't have effective interoperability standards, then these resources won't be used and useful because they will be isolated by particular vendors or walled off so that others can't create an integrated solution to market. So again, all my opinions based on a whole lot of different conversations across a whole lot of different countries and states. And I'm happy to take any questions about any of these or thoughts.
Thanks, Chris, for walking us through that. It's certainly a lot of information, and I'll be sure to share Chris's material with everyone and file it in the project as well. So, because it was a lot of information in a short period of time, but do appreciate, Chris, you sharing that. Questions, comments on what Chris covered? And maybe I'll start with a question, and it'll show my lack of deep understanding on this topic of interoperability. But is this a challenge that we need to address in this pilot, or is interoperability and standards something larger than what this task force is going to be able to address? I'm just trying to figure out where does the solution for this issue lie?
Simply, I would say the task force ought to raise its hand and tell PUCT and ERCOT to get off their duff and mandate 1547. That's the simple answer. The reality, and this was said awesome yesterday in the Indiana Commission, one of the engineers stood up and said, what could we possibly offer in this discussion when we've already had 10,000 engineers from around the world work for 7 years to develop the standard? What could we possibly have to offer? It was a really interesting comment from a utility engineer to basically say there's a reason that we have IEEE and IEC in the world. There's a lot of people that generously donate their time to put these things together. It's a very well thought out standard that is being modified as we speak for re-release in 2025 or 26 with additional considerations. And I think that just generically being able to adopt that and utilize that standard is the right approach, and then making sure to stay current with it.
Got it, John. You have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Chris. Really great analysis. I tried to very clumsily say what you said in our last workshop, but you did a super job of articulating, especially from a grid operator's perspective, I think why we at Bandera Electric are very focused on interoperability and the need to have multiple devices from multiple manufacturers all being operable from a platform. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more, and it might be on the point about API fees kind of going away once there are interoperability standards. Because I feel like we've heard from manufacturers that well, to provide the level of access, some sort of like kind of open access, interoperability, it would be too expensive. We'd have to engineer different solutions. And it's really cumbersome, and it's better to work with channel partners who might have already solved that problem. And I wonder, like at a platform level, you talked about EVs and storage and PVs and home energy management systems all being on a platform. If there were the interoperability standards adopted that you suggest, would it be much easier for kind of a better, robust ecosystem to develop those platforms, and where maybe that expense is, kind of commoditized or spread across a different sector?
I'll start with an example that we all understand. When you plug your printer in at home, uh, everything says, "Hey, look, there's a printer here. Hey, look, I can be an install. Hey, look, this all works." Um, that is the direction that this needs to head. That scenario currently exists in the UK because the UK 10 years ago committed to SIM broadly. So every ADMS, DERMS, EMS, both operational and market, every GIS, every CIS is mandated to be SIM compliant. Our nonprofit registry is SIM compliant in the sense of making sure that every data field is able to be interchanged at the data layer without a software interface to eliminate all those costs. So getting the standard in place evolves naturally so that any API cost disappears because manufacturers just have to include it because it's just the way of the world. So the UK is probably the best example of it, being done. Here in the US, there is a variety of different groups. Just because I heard Rajiv talk, I know that the Kraken Flex platform can incorporate all of these resources and do all of these things. In fact, the Kraken team is in partnership with Pecan Street, and they're doing the first testing of receiving a quote utility signal to dial power factor at the inverter with their platform. So I think that the simple answer to your question is if the standard is adopted, then the manufacturing industry rapidly follows. Once California and IEEE did 1547 2018, we now have over 75 qualified inverter manufacturers that have already passed UL 1741 SB. They're fully qualified under the new standard already, which means that there is zero incremental cost to consumers and industry for every single piece of equipment to be fully certified to that standard. So I think that the general comment that I would make is that there's been a ridiculous amount of work done by industry and standards group to develop the standard, and now the onus is on the states to adopt it and make sure everybody's using it.
Thanks, Chris. Greg?
Hi, thanks, Chris. I don't know if you saw the note in the chat, but I appreciate the thoughtful and complete presentation and certainly lack of bias. I was wondering if you could maybe expound upon these standards and how programs like ERCOT's ADER systems and requirements kind of go above and beyond, and how you see that playing out for a one-size-fits-all approach across North America, plus potentially API components that are unique to specific programs like the ADER. I'll just briefly state that from an OEM's perspective, the standards are extremely helpful in making a uniform ask on behalf of utilities and others who want to utilize the capacity of those who invested in it. But the nuanced approach regionally just leaves us open to trying to find add-ons to a one-size-fits-all that can differ not only regionally, but between municipalities.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's really fun to work in Saudi Arabia when we deal with one regulator and a market that's as big as ERCOT, and there's, fundamentally, for all intents, one utility. Everything's pretty easy. In the US with 3,000 utilities, 9 ISOs, I don't know how many coordinating councils, and we have a very mucky market structure here in the United States. I believe strongly that the work going on in PJM and SPP and BISO for 2222 implementation will standardize many of these concepts, very much like and I do encourage you all, again, I sent Jason the UK market flexibility presentation. There is spectacular information in that. As each market begins to develop these distribution products, I think because the United States is doing FERC 2222 in parallel, and FERC had the foresight. I know that everybody considers 2222 a burden. I'm trying to get everybody to recognize it's an opportunity for immense savings, because rather than 3,000 utilities and 9 ISOs developing this ad hoc, we have the opportunity to develop it collaboratively, which means we do have the opportunity to participate broadly across these structures and develop common products or common thought processes, such that market signaling metrics within SIM can be defined by the grid operator and market operator for signaling with very simple APIs or structures for aggregators and or the equipment to receive that signal and execute accordingly. So I think that, yes, this has got an evolution that will occur over the next several years. But 1547 adoption is step one. Step two is working to define, rather than, I think we're spending a little bit too much time trying to develop nuances between solar and battery and DG and EVs and everything in between, versus saying, as a market, I want a 4-hour strip on peak or a 2-hour strip on peak, and I don't care what supplies it. This is going to be the signal. And as long as you can supply that, it's a market product. And if you can measure it and monitor it and prove it, it serves the need. And stop with this crazy incremental designation down to the nth degree of every potential resource. So the market needs products, the grid needs reliability. To find those needs, and any product that can serve them has the opportunity to serve them. So I think, we are in a state that will transition, and it will be difficult for OEMs over some period of time, but we do have the opportunity to do much better.
So we've got 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to ancillaries and finish that conversation. Maybe we can start talking path forward. Tiffany, you brought up project 54233 at the last meeting. What are your thoughts on using that project as the path forward here?
Yeah, I think that I would encourage everybody to participate in the rulemaking in 54233. It has 3 components to it. One is the interconnection process, but then the other one is the technical standards. And the technical standards are for all DERs. It's not just the more than 250 kilowatt systems. And so staff is still working through drafting a proposal. But I think that would be probably the appropriate place to provide some comments on interoperability. Ramya?
Hey, thank you. So we have 3 rules that are open right now. 25.210 is for the large DERs. 25.211 is for the small DERs. And then we have 25.212 that is all about the technical standards that we're working with ERCOT to have it published. And like what Stephanie said, we do have the docket open and we have received comments. And one thing that I would also like to mention is that we cannot just reference 1547 directly because it's a paid standard, and we need to make sure that it is available to everybody. So that is the reason why, if you look at almost all our rules and how the standards are defined, it has to be available in such a way that everybody has access to reference what the standards are. So it'll be really helpful if all of you participate in that and ensure that your comments are filed publicly such that everybody, which means that anybody who participates in our market can respond and reply to those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. Maybe just one question on that, on 54233 is in terms of where we are in the process. So is the next step a proposal for publication? And then there would be another round of comments, or where are we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the next steps, I mean, we have received comments and we are, as you all know, inundated with all the different rulemakings from this legislative session and the previous one. So we are working through, and some of these rules have deadlines that we are basically trying very hard to meet. So this is one that does not have a deadline. So it is being pushed back because of that reason.
Got it. No, and thank you for all the hard work on literally everything that y'all have to do. So maybe just to close this out, and I see Jaden, you have your hand up. The next step in that project will be a proposal for publication. That's another opportunity for substantive comments to be filed. So nobody's late if you haven't filed comments yet. Because there'll be another round of comments as soon as that comes up at an open meeting in the next couple months. So, a question for the task force. So each individual, company can make those comments. A question that we will ultimately need to answer is whether or not the task force wants to file comments. I'm not pushing for that. But that's something that maybe we'll leave as an open action item for when the proposed publication comes out. We can take a look at it and decide if, in addition to individual companies commenting, does the task force want to file something, even if it's to say that this is an important issue that we've identified for the success of the pilot program, right? So it could be something pretty general. I don't think we have to decide that today, but we can put that on our to-do list. Yep.
To answer Suzanne's question on the chat, we are hoping I don't think it's going to be taken up on the November 30th open meeting because we have, I think, 8 or 9 other rules that are going to come up on that open meeting. So it might be December or it might be pushed to January. It is kind of fluid at this point. So it's sorry about that. That's basically where we are. And just to add one other point is that there are multiple issues that have been identified under the topic of interoperability. At least that's how I am hearing this. There might be certain avenues that this task force can try and take on and not just wait for the rulemaking, because by under the heading of interoperability, maybe we need to make it a sub bullet as to what requires actual rulemaking and what can maybe be targeted to move forward at a faster rate in this task force. Thank you. That's just Ramya's opinion. It's not like a commission or nothing behind that. So just want to also say that.
Thank you, Ramya. Appreciate it. Jake.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that obviously interoperability is a very important topic. And as we heard today in the presentation, which I really appreciated, thank you. It's a big topic, right? It is sweeping and it needs to be done at a very broad scale. And I think that rulemaking is really the correct forum for interoperability. Whether or not this task force takes a position, I think based on the conversations we've had, it's going to be difficult to come to a consensus on a specific position, or even maybe whether it is crucial to the success of the pilot. It might be, but I do think that we could end up spending a lot of time on an issue that is going to end up being much, much broader, and definitionally needs to be much broader than the pilot. Because if we implement some kind of pilot-based interoperability standards, that's not really a standard. It's a pilot requirement, and really only specific to the pilot. And I think what we really all need to see from an interoperability standpoint are broader standards that really compel OEMs to build their systems in a certain way, and that's not going to happen for just a pilot. So I do think it's important, and very open to filing comments as a task force. But I think that for the most part, rulemaking is really where the interoperability discussions should be focused.
Yep. And I'm not suggesting that we might be able to come to a consensus on what the rule should say, but it may be helpful just from a situational awareness for the commission to know that this is an issue that we've had some good discussions on. Some believe that the pilot will help get to interoperability. Some believe that we need interoperability to make this pilot successful. Right. I think we can be factual and provide just situational awareness so that that's out there. Right. So I think that would be probably at a maximum what we could accomplish if we as a task force wanted to file comments. And I'm not suggesting that we should. I think
I agree with that.
We'll make that decision when we see the proposal for publication and decide if we want to do something. Michael. You are on mute. Or something. We can't hear you. Not yet. Okay, you'll be back. Okay, so in our remaining 20 minutes, I want to make sure we spend some time on the other ancillary services discussion. Where do we want to start with this one? Who wants to start with this one? Yeah, maybe just to recap, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but ERCOT asked a very good question last time in terms of if you had something like ECRS, do you still have to solve the interoperability issue? And there were some responses that perhaps adding ECRS could help some folks from an economic modeling perspective get past the interoperability issue. So Michael, if you're back, you can talk, and then if not, Greg. We can't hear you. Okay, you'll be back. Greg, you go first.
Yeah, I'd like to part and parcel the issues, but this may be one of the few consensus items we can leave with, and I'm not sure it's timely or appropriate. I'd defer to Dave. I'd like to set a deadline or a target, perhaps, to allow ECRS for ADERs. Maybe as soon as first quarter of 24.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I can really offer today is one, I hear the group. I hope you all know that we're listening in terms of it being an important part of how you are thinking of the economics, and I presume that's largely related to the duration requirements associated with non-spin as compared to ECRS. We are still working through it, particularly with our system operations folks, to see to what degree they're going to be comfortable with ECRS. I think they remain open to it, but they're just not quite there yet. So I just simply can't promise that at some date certain that it will be part of the program. I mean, all I can do is all I can do is offer to continue to work with our system operations folks to see what it would take to get them comfortable to allow that as part of a phase 2 of the pilot.
Maybe to peel on that a little bit, then Dave, is there a time frame that makes sense for us to shoot for, understanding that it's going to take whatever amount of time it takes? Is there a time frame we can shoot for to have some feedback on that?
Can I go back and talk to some of the
Yeah.
system operations folks? I mean, I know one of the things that's of course come up and we shared is, some more experience watching these folks get deployed. It's a chicken and the egg issue. It's sort of what I'm hearing from this group, right? I think the limitation on ancillary services and, implementation of 1131 interoperability. Anyways, there's some. I'll sort of ignore that one. I think we can sort of separate the issues, but we are not seeing very much participation yet in terms of periods of response, periods of non-spin provision. So it's been hard for us to get necessarily comfortable up to this point. And on the flip side, we're saying people are not necessarily as eager or willing to participate until it opens up, right? So that's the chicken and the egg problem. Maybe then and I think Eric had put this in there, is let's set a time, and maybe it's a separate workshop, a virtual workshop or something like that, where we can have someone from system ops sort of lay out their thoughts more directly and kind of hear it from the team specifically.
I think that's fair. I think that and this may not be the right approach, but what I had in mind was maybe a timeline to making a decision. And if maybe you can tell me, Dave, after you go visit with your folks, would a workshop be helpful to advance this discussion? And if so, we'll absolutely schedule it, but maybe just having some visibility into when we might expect a decision on it. I think that would be a good next step. So let me know if you need a workshop. Happy to schedule it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the thoughts maybe where a workshop could be useful is to do some of those talking, that direct conversation with them in terms of what they like to see. Obviously, Greg put in there, I think there was discussion around, we haven't really seen that many non-spin deployments. And frankly, there's probably been even sort of limited energy deployments. We obviously are still really only seeing one participant in terms of active participation. So some of those things I think are just maybe are continuing to keep us hesitant on the system operations point of view. And again, I understand the flip side of it from your old point of view as well. So maybe where a workshop could be is talking about and defining a little bit more clearly what operations folks would like to see.
Got it. Okay, Eric.
Can I jump in there? Well, good timing, I guess, for me to jump in. So if we have a chicken and egg problem, Dave, about wanting to see deployments but not having enough participation, which is maybe driven by we picked the hardest answer service first. What if we take the guinea hen approach of saying, what about a smaller egg? So I think we would all love to see a larger, non-spin quantity, a larger ECRS quantity. But if you even let it get to 20 megawatts of ECRS, or some smallish rounding error number, people might jump in for that. And we might get to some caps and other conversations. And so rather than making it a binary, should we allow this? Could we make it how much of this can we allow in order for the pilot to progress?
Got it. Let the negotiations begin. I mean, I think that's sort of the things to work through. I think that's a fair point. It's a pilot. We have limits in place that there provide some protection. Originally, I think the concern when we wrote the governing document is obviously ECRS didn't exist. And so there was the question of just general experience with it. That's not true anymore. But anyways, I think that would be the usefulness of the workshop is just to kind of work through those negotiations and see where we can get some momentum.
But now even Bloomberg understands how ECRS works, right? It's just a joke. I apologize.
No.
About that, Eric.
So Dave, maybe the next good step would be a couple of dates from your side of when you might be available for a workshop, and then we will throw it on people's calendars and then keep advancing the ball.
I can work on that, Jason. I'll get back to you, and then with some options, and we'll see. I think this, if it's specific to this topic, maybe even just like an hour would be sufficient, if not more than sufficient, to go over it. So I'll work with some folks and get some times back to you.
Okay. So we're getting towards the end of our time commitment with you all. Anything else on this topic? So I feel like we've addressed a lot of the big rocks in the jar and have passed forward on most of them, if not all of them. I think it's going to require a number of additional conversations between now and the 15th of December. And I know that we've got holidays on either side of that December 15th quarterly meeting, but I think if we can aim to have a lot of the additional conversations we've talked about having, the utility conversations about density, the workshop on other ancillary services, all the things we've talked about. If we can try to get those completed before December 15th, so that December 15th could serve as a report out on all of this stuff and kind of where we are, I think that would be a good goal to shoot for. Does anybody have a contrary view on that? That only leaves us 4 weeks, including the week of Thanksgiving, to get that done. So I think that will be a heavy lift if we're able to do that. So that's why I'm not trying to not be aggressive. I think that is an aggressive schedule. So. And let's shoot for that, understanding that things may have to change depending on constraints that people have. But let's try to shoot for that. The December 15th meeting will be a good report out on all this stuff. Tiffany, if you wouldn't mind flipping your document again back to the team so that they have your good work in their hands, that would be excellent. In our last 10 minutes, is there anything else we need to talk about as a task force? Anything that we're failing to talk about that we need to talk about for the good of the cause?
Jason, I'd make one last point. This is Chris Hickman again, that, to the extent that it would be interesting for you guys to review the UK market products or the different things, I would encourage the task force to work cooperatively together to see if it is possible to develop products for the grid and marketplace that are independent of the resource and more standardized, because that effort will be rewarded through more effective standards and more effective and quickly implemented APIs and communication capability if the market can be simplified versus made dramatically more complex by trying to create products by resource type. I think we've proven this pretty emphatically around the world. And if this particular working group can attempt to look at existing ERCOT products, whether it's capacity, energy, or ancillary services, and rather than attempting to define new ones, figure out how all of these different types of resources can fit within existing or define standard product sets. This is just going to make things a whole lot more effective going forward than a process to continually define products that are specific to solar or batteries or EVs or other things like that.
Got it. Thank you. Tiffany or Dave or anybody from PUC or ERCOT, do y'all have anything to add before we land the plane?
Nothing in my end, Jason.
Nothing
Great.
from me either.
Well, let me, as we close out, just thank everybody for the conversations and for moving us along for the good of all Texans. You know, we advocate for the positions of our companies, but we also have the greater goal in mind of making this a successful pilot project for the state and the customers that we serve in general. So I appreciate the professionalism today, as always. Our next scheduled meeting then is the 15th of December as our official quarterly task force meeting. If any of these additional conversations occur and it makes sense for us to drop in a workshop between now and then, I will do that. If anybody feels that would be helpful, in addition to the one that we talked about with ERCOT, if we're able to do that one between now and then. If anybody has anything they want us to get together as a group and talk about, please don't wait for me to schedule it. If you feel strongly we need to get back together before the 15th of December, please let me know. This session, like I said earlier, will be posted on YouTube for folks that may have missed it, that want to get caught up on where we are. And I will circulate and also post in the project the material that Chris went through on interoperability. So appreciate all of that. With that, I'll conclude our session and thank you all for joining. James, saw your hand up at the last minute. What can I do for you, sir?
Last minute comment in the chat. I don't know whether it's appropriate or not.
Haven't been watching the chat. So are there any rules that would need to be changed to allow use of blockchain transactive energy for energy trading in conjunction with the ADER participation? So I will open the floor if anyone wants to address that.
I assume yes, but I don't know. I think that's beyond the task force. Seems pretty technical and probably very different from how we do business at the moment.
Yeah. As I understand it, that can happen within a retailer. So I think that'd be up to a retailer to implement within their portfolio.
I suspect Tesla could comment, but I don't think that they would.
Chris, got your hand up.
Just a quick comment. There's been a lot of work, obviously, around transactive energy in the California marketplace. Blockchain is being, I know people consider a lot of negative things with blockchain, with money and everything, but blockchain is just a technology, just to remind everybody, and it's a really good one. So there's a lot of people implementing blockchain. But on the transactive energy side, there was a workshop and there were several different groups, both EMS and OEMs, that talked about multi-tens of millions of dollars to attempt to implement that kind of complexity at the retail level, while they believe that transactive energy at the wholesale marketplace could have a place they were very reticent about transactive energy in the retail marketplace just due to the complexity. And the example that was provided in that workshop was telecommunications spending several $billion in the deregulation phase for 50-page bills, and after 15 years abandoning the entire concept and going back to block rates because consumers simply did not want it. So there was a lot of very interesting discussion that happened in California, and Australia and Ireland have both considered the topic, and Ireland in particular, with Scotland and the UK, went completely the other direction towards a very simplified standard set of products to minimize the cost of implementation and ease of access. So just FYI on conversations that have occurred around the world.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, James, for the question. All right. We are at the end of our time. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.